13-year-old Amy McNeil had her whole life ahead of her. But when she was kidnapped on her way to school, her future was in peril. The first call her terrified parents made was to the FBI. They hoped that the combined experience of agents and local law enforcement would flesh out the kidnappers before they took her life.
Wealth has its rewards, but it also brings its dangers. Kidnapping is one of them. No ordeal is more horrifying for a family than to have a child taken. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Kidnapping cases are among the most challenging for law enforcement, who often must remain out of sight, yet close at hand, ready to move in at a moment's notice.
About 20 miles south of Fort Worth, Texas, lies Alvarado, a small town in rural Johnson County. A few wealthy residents found Alvarado a safe haven away from the state's urban centers. The McNeils were among them. They lived as one of the area's most prominent families, partly from the return that Mr. McNeil made by selling an early design of the handheld calculator. At 7:15 a.m. on Friday, January 11th, 1985, they began their day having breakfast together, as was their usual routine.
Amy!
Afterwards, their teenage son would drive himself and his 13-year-old sister, Amy, to school.
Hi, darling. Please be careful out there today. Come on, come on, come on. Bye, Amy.
On the way, Amy and her brothers stopped to pick up their cousin as well. He and his family lived in a separate house on the McNeil estate. At about 7:45, they were finally on their way to class. Then, from behind an abandoned truck, a sedan pulled out across the road, forcing the teenagers' Jeep off to the side. A gunman jumped out of the car and approached the Jeep. He demanded that Amy get into the sedan. The blonde-haired man warned her brother not to contact the authorities. He would call the family in a short while with his demands. Instinctively, the teenager started to get out to help his sister.
Leave and go home, boy!
But the kidnappers threatened to kill him and his sister if he tried to follow them. As they raced off with the 13-year-old, the teenagers couldn't make out the license plate. In a matter of seconds, the girl was gone. They turned around and sped home. The boys told the McNeils what had happened and repeated the kidnappers' warning not to contact the authorities.
They pulled us over and they had guns. And then if you told the police that they kill her.
Mr. McNeil ignored the demand and called the FBI field office in nearby Fort Worth.
Give me the FBI.
Former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown, a 30-year veteran, understood that when a kidnapping occurs, every second counts.
Hello, this is Clint Brown.
I worked many kidnapping cases, and in not a single case did the subject get away with it. The number one goal in all cases like this is the safe return of the victim. All activities, all actions are all geared toward not doing anything to endanger the safety of the person who's been kidnapped.
The FBI's first task was to set up a recorder on the family's phone. By capturing the kidnapper's voice, they hoped to identify him or the place he was calling from. The FBI also informed the local phone company to be prepared to trace any incoming calls. Agents instructed the father on how to handle the call. He needed to insist on proof from the kidnappers that his daughter was still alive.
Expect a call to come in today.
So you probably want to look for a
The fact that they had worn no disguises disturbed former Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs, who called in the Texas Rangers moments after he arrived.
How about that one over there?
The kidnappers hadn't tried to conceal who they were at all. They just, as we call it, they just barefaced them, just no mask, no disguises, anything. That means there's not going to be a victim around telling who they are and what they look like. They're going to kill them.
What is this?
Uncovering the kidnappers' identities might prevent that. Using an identikit that included hundreds of facial features, investigators worked with Amy's brother and cousin, building a composite of the man who held the shotgun. The teenagers had never seen the man with the stringy blonde hair before. They also provided a description of the kidnapper's car.
It seems like the people who engage in this are people of questionable and limited mental capacity, and very often they have, I guess what you might say, delusions based on drug use. Very often, you know, the need to get money to promote their drug habits or what drives them, and so we have that being a motive for the kidnappings very much, and that certainly impairs their ability to think or plan or pull this off successfully.
At 10 a.m., over 2 hours after Amy had been abducted, the phone finally rang.
Hello?
It was one of her kidnappers.
Yeah?
Did your son tell you I had your daughter?
The man demanded a $100,000 ransom.
Yeah?
Half was to be in $100 bills, the other half in smaller denominations.
Half of the 100, half 50.
None of it could be sequenced.
I'm gonna need some
As
time.
instructed, Amy's father pleaded to speak to his daughter, but the kidnapper refused. Her captor insisted Amy was still alive and that her father could speak to her. When the man called back to say where to drop the ransom, he added that if the family called the FBI, they would never see Amy again. The call lasted less than a minute, not long enough to establish a trace for the technology of 1985. Agents played back the recording, listening for any background noise that might reveal the location. They figured the call was likely made from a payphone since they could hear wind and traffic noise. But they heard nothing more specific.
Yes, sir.
And no one in the family recognized the kidnapper's voice. Though Amy's family was wealthy, her father did not have $100,000 in cash available since most of his assets were tied up in investments. He called his associates to fly in on chartered planes with whatever cash they were able to withdraw. The next call they received was not the one retired Sheriff Eddie Boggs had hoped for. The press had learned of the kidnapping from one of McNeil's neighbors.
I got a call from my chief deputy, and he said that he has all sorts of media representatives out there wanting a story. They knew that there had been a kidnapping, there had been a ransom demand. They demanded to talk to somebody about the story and that they were going to go on the air with it.
If the kidnappers discovered that law enforcement was involved, they would likely dispose of Amy before the ransom was delivered. Investigators discussed what they should do next as precious minutes ticked by. The FBI instructed the family and the Johnson County Sheriff on how to proceed.
And the FBI said, well, here's what you do. You have your chief deputy call each one of the reporters in, ask him for his ID, ask him who is the very top man at his station that he can talk to, and then tell that top man, we're not going to confirm whether or not you have a story, but if you do have a story and you run it, you could possibly cost the life of a little girl.
Every local press agency agreed not to run the story until notified by the sheriff. Just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang again.
Hello? Yeah, I'm the guy who got your daughter.
It was the same man who had called earlier. On a separate line, an agent contacted the chief of security at the local phone company, who was standing by, hoping to trace the call.
Yeah.
He trapped the number
Yeah,
and began to
we're
track
right
its
there.
origin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. McNeil begged the kidnapper to let him hear his daughter's voice.
Calm down.
This time, the man allowed the frightened girl to speak to her father.
Daddy?
Her eyes concealed to prevent her from knowing where she was.
You haven't hurt me.
Be my girl.
He could hear her crying. Despite his own
calm down,
fear,
girl.
he reassured Amy that everything would be okay
Be fine.
No, Daddy, I'm
and that she
okay.
would soon be
You haven't
home.
hurt me.
That's when the man grabbed the phone. The kidnapper said that he had not yet secured a location for the ransom to be dropped.
What do you mean you're having trouble getting a drop zone?
Again, he promised to call back later.
Hello?
The room fell silent as former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
It was very heartrending to listen to it. She was frightened, and of course, Mr. McNeil was frightened. The conversation was very short. Mr. McNeil encouraged her to keep her upper lip up and remember who she was. And that was the end of the conversation.
They hoped the trace would be successful.
That's the hardest part, correct?
The security chief reported that the call had originated from outside the phone company's calling area. And since the call had been terminated, it would be impossible to trace it through the neighboring system. The phone company was able to determine that the call was made from somewhere in the town of Kennedale, 25 miles north of the McNeil's estate.
Good.
Amy was still in Texas, close to Fort Worth.
Pin it down? Okay, sounds like.
But without a specific
Pin it down.
location, investigators had little to go
You
on.
know she's in Texas.
Yeah.
We had no idea, no evidence, no leads, nowhere to go. The only thing we had was the description of a car. I did have my troops, what few I had, to go out and start in a perimeter and expanding the perimeter, checking every farm, every house, every housing addition, everywhere they could for a car that matched the description that we had.
Johnson County deputies fanned out over a 30-mile radius from Alvarado up to Kennedale, searching for the kidnapper's car. They also alerted other local officers to be on the lookout for the four-door sedan. Yet without a license plate, it was not likely they'd locate the vehicle among the rural expanse. Almost 6 hours after 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been abducted, her father's friends from Texas and Arkansas had begun to arrive in Alvarado, carrying tens of thousands in cash. Texas Rangers escorted them from a small airport to a local bank where the currency would be processed before it was paid to the kidnappers. Wearing latex gloves, Rangers recorded and bundled the $100,000 ransom. They assembled half of it in $100 bills as the kidnapper had instructed. Another $50,000 was compiled from smaller denominations. Retired Texas Ranger Sergeant John Dendy helped direct the processing.
They had quite a time raising that amount of money on such short notice. But after they got the money, then the Rangers that were at the bank started to getting clean bags to put it in. In other words, no fingerprints, plastic bags, and made copies of the bills, so we'd have the serial numbers on each bill. Everything was loaded up, and then all we had to do then was sit and wait until more demands came in.
In the late afternoon, deputies had located a car that fit the description of the kidnapper's vehicle, parked 20 miles from the McNeil's estate. A license plate check revealed that the sedan had been stolen the day before from Mesquite, Texas, 50 miles east of Alvarado. Inside, deputies found no obvious signs of Amy or her abductors. They impounded the car and continued to canvass the area for witnesses who may have seen the driver. At the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, the FBI processed the sedan for forensic evidence. From the interior, they removed several sets of fingerprints. But without a suspect's prints to compare them to, the recovered prints could not help identify Amy's captors or their current whereabouts. By 11:30 p.m., 16 hours after Amy had been taken, her family had received 3 more phone calls, but still had not been told where the ransom was to be dropped. They hoped this would be the call that could secure Amy's release.
Hello?
It was the same man who had called earlier.
Yeah?
Once again, the phone company initiated a trace.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now.
Amy's father told the kidnapper that he had the $100,000 prepared as the man had requested.
No, I don't want to do this tomorrow.
But the caller said that
I'll
it was
charter
too
a plane if
late.
I have to.
The ransom drop he had in mind was at least 200 miles away from Alvarado.
Gas station.
No.
By the time Mr. McNeil reached the location, it would be light, too risky for the kidnapper to take a chance on being seen.
No, I don't.
The father pleaded to make the exchange tonight.
No, I can't wait till tomorrow.
The man refused. He said he'd call back tomorrow to make the arrangements.
We didn't think they would let us have her back alive, you know, in good shape. We had no idea what they'd done to her in this period of time that they'd had her.
Agents waited for word to see if the trace had been successful.
Yeah. No, it wasn't long enough.
It had not.
No. Couldn't get a trace.
Once again, the phone company had failed to secure the kidnapper's location.
All right, next.
Investigators could only hope that 13-year-old Amy McNeil would survive the night and eventually be reunited with her parents. By 5 p.m. on Saturday, January 12, 1985, a day and a half had passed since 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been kidnapped on her way to school in Alvarado, Texas. One of several unidentified kidnappers had called Amy's wealthy family 7 times. He demanded $100,000 in unsequenced currency, but had not told the McNeils where to drop the ransom. Though the kidnapper had also warned Amy's family not to call the FBI, Mr. McNeil had done so and was joined by several agents, a dozen Texas Rangers, and the Johnson County Sheriff's Department. Her abductors had promised to call again at 5 p.m. with the location of the ransom exchange and to confirm that Amy remained unharmed. Despite the agonizing wait, former Special Agent Clint Brown and his team wasted no time in preparing.
When the instructions were anticipated, a plan was devised to deliver the ransom money with Mr. McNeil driving the car and carrying the money himself for delivery, so that anybody would see the car. It was the limousine that he had. They would assume he was in the car by himself. Actually concealed in the car would be 2 FBI agents.
The agents also outfitted Mr. McNeil with a mini cassette device to record any conversations he may have with the kidnappers if they should approach his limousine. The interior of the car would be wired as well, and the 2 concealed agents would be heavily armed. At 5:10 p.m., the kidnapper called again. He told Mr. McNeil to drive 40 miles alone in his limousine from Alvarado on Interstate 30 to East Dallas and take exit 51. There he would find a gas station. The father was to be there by 7 p.m. in order to receive further instructions on the payphone by the vending machine. Mr. McNeil spoke to Amy briefly before her abductor disconnected. She was scared, but unharmed. The call was too brief to be traced.
All right, call him
As
again.
planned, a contingent of FBI, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel would follow McNeil's car at a distance. The team would be fully equipped, as retired Texas Ranger Bill Gunn remembers.
We got all of the assets available, tracking devices, aircraft. We had a tracking device on Mr. McNeil's car, so that if we lost contact with it on the ground, both aircraft could receive it.
Amy's father promised his wife that he wouldn't come home without their daughter. He was fitted with body armor and provided with a sidearm in the event the kidnappers attacked him. The two agents with him would be armed with shotguns and semi-automatic pistols.
Copy on the scene. You'll check that out.
They checked their radios to make sure they could be heard by the follow team.
You guys okay back there? Check 1, check 2.
Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was assigned to ride in the limousine and advise the concerned father.
I recall one of our main instructions to him was not to let himself be taken hostage. And we talked through that quite a bit. He was to deliver the money, and we would then take over, try to effect the arrest, but he was in no way to get involved himself.
McNeil got the go-ahead to leave for the gas station in East Dallas, 40 miles away. When the limo had reached about a mile, the agent instructed the others to follow. Since the kidnapper had provided a specific route to the Dallas gas station, former Ranger Sergeant John Dendy and the others feared that the kidnappers could be surveilling the limousine as it traveled.
We had no idea where they would be, who they were, what they were in, or anything about them. And in order for them not to become suspicious of any of us, we kept a good distance behind the car.
As the stretch crossed county lines, the Rangers radioed ahead to local authorities. They informed traffic patrols not to stop the speeding unmarked cars and provided license plates for their vehicles. Several units raced ahead to set up surveillance of the service station in East Dallas. While most maintained an outside perimeter, one team held a distant view of the payphone. They stood by, ready to act, in the event that the kidnappers revealed themselves or their 13-year-old hostage. Agents reported that the limousine had just reached exit 51. The phone had begun ringing at exactly 7 p.m. when Amy's father rolled into the service station.
What? Okay, hold on.
It was the 8th call he had received from his daughter's kidnappers over the past 34 hours. The man did not give the father the news he had hoped for. He told Mr. McNeil to take Interstate 20 east to Tyler, Texas, almost 100 miles from Dallas. At the US 69 exit, he would find another gas station, where he'd receive another call at 9:20 on the payphone outside. For retired Special Agent Clint Brown, it was difficult to predict what Amy's abductors might be planning.
We could tell the kidnappers were not very well organized. They seemed somewhat ill at ease, confused. Some of their plans seemed to change. They didn't seem to have a clear idea of where the money was to be delivered, and so they even appeared to be stalling at times, trying to formulate a workable plan that they thought they could use. So it did not appear that they had thought this out very well at all.
At the second gas station in Tyler, Amy's father was directed to drive to a third one in Longview, 40 miles further east, by 11 p.m. From there, he was ordered to drive 60 more miles north to a fourth gas station in Mount Pleasant, Texas. Precisely at midnight, he'd receive another call at the payphone outside. By now, investigators had covered over 180 miles, traveling for well over 5.5 hours. They hadn't anticipated the long trip, and 2 surveillance aircraft were forced to turn back to refuel in Dallas. Despite their frustrations, the team was determined to outlast the kidnappers.
We had no idea what they were going to do next. They just kept running us over East Texas. We saw a large portion of East Texas, and we didn't know when it was going to stop. But we knew that we were there for the duration.
But the situation was only getting worse. About halfway to the Mount Pleasant gas station, the limousine began losing power. After racing at speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour for extended periods, the engine simply quit. Agent Kicklighter feared that the mechanical problem would jeopardize any chance they may have still had to rescue the 13-year-old.
We're all getting a little tense and excited and worried that we're not going to get to the drop site and that we're not going to be able to get Amy back.
Dozens of miles away, at the gas station in Mount Pleasant, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers had been deployed to surveil the payphone. At midnight, it began to ring. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer. But he missed the call. At midnight on January 13th, 1985, just outside Mount Pleasant, Texas, 2 FBI agents and the wealthy father of a kidnapped 13-year-old girl worked frantically to repair a limousine's engine. Mr. McNeil's limousine was the car his daughter's kidnappers expected him to be driving alone to a Mount Pleasant gas station payphone by midnight. As Mr. McNeil tried to restart his car, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers, deployed to surveil the gas station, watched helplessly as the phone began ringing. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer, but he missed the call for the final location of the $100,000 ransom exchange. Patrolling the desolate roads around the gas station in Mount Pleasant, the support team was informed that Mr. McNeil had finally found his car's difficulty, according to former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown.
The car that Mr. McNeil was riding in began to develop electrical problems. Apparently, the alternator wasn't keeping the battery charged up, and so as time went on, the lights began to dim, and he began to have trouble with the electrical system of the car.
The communications and tracking devices wired to the limo system had drained its power over the past 7 hours. Disconnecting several instruments provided enough juice to get the engine started again. Though the headlights were inoperable, the car would move forward. Mr. McNeil and the 2 agents pressed on without full power and limited visibility. Their path was lit by an aircraft overhead. The remaining FBI agents, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel gathered at a separate filling station a short distance from where the kidnappers had planned to call. They debated what to do next, since Mr. McNeil had missed the midnight appointment, and they had no way of contacting the kidnappers. With few options, investigators decided to send the limousine to the Mount Pleasant gas station late, figuring that the kidnappers would probably call again.
We were pretty well counting on the fact that they were going to show up or call, that they were desperate for the money. We reassured them we had the money, and we certainly reassured them we wanted Amy back. So we thought that they would stay connected to follow through with the payoff site.
At approximately 1 a.m., Mr. McNeil and the FBI agents arrived at the Mount Pleasant gas station in the troubled limousine. Almost 8 hours and 200 miles after they had first departed Alvarado, the limousine's engine gave out for good. The vehicle wasn't going anywhere without major repair. They could do nothing more but wait in the chilly night and pray that the kidnappers would contact them.
Due to the fact that we had to drive very slowly in the limousine, we were late getting to the drop site, approximately an hour. We were somewhat concerned about that, but we set up to wait by the drop site.
Texas Rangers kept watch, remaining hidden in the field across from the gas station. The fate of 13-year-old Amy McNeil remained unknown. Then, at 1:15 in the morning, the payphone started ringing. As investigators had suspected, one of the kidnappers called back, eager to get the ransom. He claimed that Amy was still alive, but refused to let her speak. Worst still, former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn and his team learned that the assailants had likely spotted the heavy presence of law enforcement on the desolate roads.
They started out telling him that he had brought the police with him, and they were very unhappy with that. So they finally told him to bring the money to a motel in Mount Pleasant. And at that time, he informed the man, the kidnapper, that he could not move the vehicle again. It was dead. And the man told him on the phone then, they said, well, we're coming after the money, and we've got plenty of guns, and there better not be any police officers around.
The father remained resolute, despite his fear of what the kidnappers may have already done to his daughter. He grabbed the ransom bag and stood outside so his daughter's captors could see him as they approached. Agents hidden in the limousine readied themselves for an armed confrontation. Retired Special Agent Kicklighter realized a mistake now could cost lives.
The exchange of a ransom during a kidnapping is always one of the most critical elements of the investigation. In this case, you don't want someone else to be hurt or taken hostage and be another victim of a kidnapping.
Hours passed in the cold January night. The Rangers stayed alert, protecting against an ambush. On the road circling the gas station, investigators saw no sign of vehicles approaching the ransom drop.
See anything out here?
By 3 in the morning, 2 hours after the kidnappers had called, it looked as if they weren't going to show. The Texas Rangers, Johnson County deputies, and the FBI considered what their next move should be.
It was decided that they were not going to come, and so the whole surveillance and monitoring situation was called off in anticipation we're going to have to start again the next day on Sunday.
Agents in the limo received word of the decision to regroup until daybreak. Mr. McNeil insisted they stay. But investigators convinced him that at present, there was nothing more they could do for his daughter.
Money, if nothing else, right?
Mr. McNeil was upset that yet another night was going to pass without a resolution to getting his daughter back. He had done everything that they had told him to do, so there was a great deal of disappointment.
A car came by to pick up McNeil and the agents. They headed back to the nearby gas station where others had begun to assemble. The two Rangers, hiding in the field for the past 3 hours, moved toward the street where the sheriff was to meet them in a separate van. As they approached, an unidentified vehicle cruised by their position. It was filled with a group of men and a young girl who headed towards the interstate.
Buick southbound.
The Rangers called for units.
Location. Need somebody to pick them up.
As they watched those believed to be the kidnappers speed off into the cold Texas night. At 3:45 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, 2 Texas Rangers believed they had spotted the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil racing away from the Ransom drop point in Mount Pleasant, Texas.
Can you copy me? Command post, copy.
They alerted all available units in the area.
High rate of speed.
En route to collect the Rangers, the Johnson County Sheriff heard their call and saw the suspicious vehicle on the highway. He gave chase, but the sedan easily pulled away from the lumbering van that former Sheriff Eddie Boggs was driving.
My van being as slow as it was, they outran me like I was standing still. There wasn't any way I could keep up even within sight of what was going on, because that chase was going over 100 miles an hour, and it was unbelievable.
Despite his best efforts, the sheriff lost the car and returned to the makeshift command post to provide a detailed account. Amy's life was now in even greater jeopardy since there was no question the kidnappers knew law enforcement was in the area. Then a call came in from their remaining aircraft. The pilot had spotted the vehicle, and investigators still on the road had resumed the chase. Former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls that the suspects were speeding west on Interstate 30.
But at that time, the rest of us had gotten involved, and we were in pursuit of the vehicle. And we continued at a high-speed chase down Interstate 30, which would have been a direction going toward Dallas, and to a small community in another county.
10 minutes later, Texas Rangers, sheriff deputies, and the FBI fell into line. The suspects refused to slow down. As the lead ranger began to close in, he was fired upon. A shotgun and pistol pelted his car with rounds. As he prepared to return fire, he glimpsed 2 girls in the back seat. One was young Amy McNeil, who they were forcing into the back window.
The people who were responsible for this started firing guns at them out the back windows on each side of the Buick. They would push Amy up into the back glass where she could be seen, and of course we couldn't return any fire.
Construction narrowed the interstate to 1 lane, but the suspects did not slow. Shots hit the grill of the lead car. Slugs pierced the carburetor, forcing the Ranger to stop. The chase continued at high speeds through 3 Texas counties before the suspects exited into the small town of Saltillo, Texas.
Dispatch, looks like we're slowing down.
Unexpectedly, at about 4 a.m., they stopped on the front lawn of a home and several fled on foot. They opened fire on investigators. 2 gunmen barricaded themselves behind a van parked in the driveway, while a third disappeared behind the house. None of the officers on the scene were wearing body armor.
When I first got out of the car, I could see this man standing in front of the van. Now, this is Sunday morning at 4 o'clock, and no moon as far as I can remember. And every time he'd pull off around with that 12 gauge, he'd line up the world.
Investigators took cover behind their vehicles and pinned the gunman down. The suspect's abandoned car was in the direct line of fire. Amy was trapped inside without any means of escape. One assailant attempted to break into the home of an elderly resident. She took cover, not knowing what was happening a few feet from where she had slept. As the firefight raged on, investigators knew that they had to somehow get to Amy McNeil before it was too late. At 4 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, the FBI, Texas Rangers and Johnson County sheriffs exchanged gunfire with the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil. After being held for almost 2 days, Amy remained trapped inside her captor's vehicle with a female assailant on the front lawn of a farmhouse in Saltillo, Texas. Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was one of several who braved the hail of bullets.
I could see one of them behind the front wheel of the car, and that's what I was mainly shooting at. I didn't have any other place to go. And the only thing I knew to do is shut them down. And the only way I'm going to do that is to hit one of them.
Several miles away in another vehicle, Amy's wealthy father was accompanied by the Johnson County Sheriff and an FBI agent on their way to the scene. They could do nothing more but hope and pray that the 13-year-old would survive the battle.
Locally here, go ahead.
As the shooting continued, a Johnson County Sheriff's deputy moved towards the suspect's car, as Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
One deputy sheriff ran from the vehicle that he arrived in over to the kidnapper's vehicle, and she asked him if he was a police officer, and he said, "Yes, ma'am," and she just really grabbed hold of him then and hung on.
The deputy handed the frightened girl to a ranger who took her out of harm's way. They ran back to the road where more backup arrived. After 44 hours in captivity, 13-year-old Amy McNeil was finally safe. The ranger needed to contact the other investigators and to tell her father the good news. Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was in the vehicle as the ranger's call came through.
It seemed like hours before we finally got the confirmation that Amy was safe. I recall Mr. McNeil beating me about the head and shoulders about Amy being safe and they've got her, and he was ecstatic, as were we all.
Hold your fire! Hold your fire!
While Amy was headed to meet her father, the shooting had subsided. The gunmen had both been wounded. Investigators held their weapons on them, not sure if the suspect still had ammunition. Then, out of the shadows, a third gunman emerged.
Freeze! Get out! Get on your knees! Get on your knees! Drop your weapon!
Realizing that escape was impossible, he surrendered. From inside the kidnapper's car, investigators cuffed the female suspect and a fourth man who had remained there during the shootout. Rangers confirmed with Amy that all the kidnappers were now in custody. On a deserted highway a mile away, Amy ran towards the waiting van that held Mr. McNeil.
Dad! Dad!
Former Special Agent Clint Brown watched the reunion between father and daughter.
Everybody was pretty emotional. You know, we all had kids and daughters and such, so we were pretty emotional just watching that reunion, and everyone was so happy that it had turned out so well that we all shared in that excitement and joy of her being recovered safely.
No one but the suspects had been hit by gunfire. Both were ex-convicts and high on methamphetamine at the time of the shooting. The elderly resident was also examined. She had survived the ordeal with only frayed nerves. A license plate check on the kidnapper's car revealed that it had been stolen in Dallas the day before. Investigators also figured out why the suspects had stopped their vehicle when they had.
We never could understand why they turned in at this particular house. But we found out later they'd run out of gasoline.
34-year-old James Foote, who had made the initial ransom calls, had previously worked for Mr. McNeil and had hatched the plan to kidnap Amy. For using a weapon in the commission of the crime, he was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 27-year-old Michael Mills, who had made the remaining calls, was likewise convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder, receiving life. The other assailants, 21-year-old Daniel Neckar Jr. and 21-year-old Thomas Barnes, were convicted of the same charges and also sentenced to life. The 18-year-old woman who was with them was charged as the men were. She had only met James Foote a few days earlier before the kidnapping had occurred. The woman was scared when the men brought the 13-year-old into the house, but stayed to prevent Amy from being abused by them. Amy later confirmed that the 18-year-old had protected her, according to retired Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs.
She was only given a 10-year probated sentence per Amy's request. The female accomplice really didn't know what she was getting into at the time whenever she joined them, because they had already been using dope for several days steady before she got involved in it. And it was just she got involved in something she couldn't get out of.
6 months later, on July 4th, 1985, Foote was transferred from the state penitentiary to the Johnson County Jail to face additional charges. Authorities had traced the weapons he used in the kidnapping to the armed home invasion of a Dallas man. Foote was also indicted in Arlington, where he had attempted to kidnap the child of a wealthy developer days before he took Amy. Outside, in the blistering Texas summer, the prison guard agreed to retrieve a water hose to cool down the inmates. When he left, Foote climbed over the 8-foot fence. He made it under the barbed wire. Seconds later, the kidnapper disappeared into the nearby woods. That evening, the Johnson County Sheriff faced the difficult task of informing Mr. McNeil that his daughter's kidnapper had escaped to where no one knew. Deputies would be stationed outside the McNeil home as long as Foote remained at large, fearing that the convict might seek vengeance on the family. Mr. McNeil immediately offered a reward for any information leading to Foote's recapture. A few days later, a call came in to Sheriff Boggs that seemed promising.
James Foote had a cousin that lived up close to Paris, Texas, that called in and said that he knew where he was and had been in contact with him. And that cousin also had some criminal charges pending on him and was willing to make a deal.
Okay, guys, we're going to be entering.
Foote had been hiding in the cousin's Paris, Texas home, 170 miles northwest of the prison.
Gain access to the property.
Johnson County deputies prepared for the assault of the single-story dwelling.
Over here. This is your living room area.
They readied themselves for another armed confrontation. As promised, the cousin made certain that Foote was inside at home for the arrest to take place.
Deputy Sheriff, freeze! Get your hands up and your
This
hands.
time, there would be no shootout. Sheriff deputies captured Foote without incident. He was returned to prison, where Foote will spend the rest of his life. At the state capitol in Austin, Texas, retired Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was among those who received commendation and recognition for the successful conclusion to the case.
Going to Austin, talking to the governor, getting a commendation. The fact that I knew that I had had something to do with saving this beautiful little girl's life was worth more than anything else they could do. That made everything worthwhile. All the 36 years that I spent in law enforcement, that was the top.
Because law enforcement responded quickly and did not relent, Amy McNeil was reunited with her family and friends, thankful for the determined officers and agents who answered the call. The nation's railroads become the conduit of a killer. He strikes at random, then disappears. Recurring clues tell police they face the worst predator of all, a ritual serial killer. He's cunning, deadly, and on the move. But the authorities are determined to stop him in his tracks.
More than 200,000 miles of train track crossed the United States. From California to Kentucky, few living near a railroad felt safe in the summer of 1999. A serial killer rode the rails, picking towns and victims at random. He left behind a trail of bloodshed, but no trace of where he would turn up next. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As the number of victims grew, the FBI enlisted the help of a profiler to help predict the killer's next move.
On December 17, 1998, in West University Place, Texas, a young woman called the police from outside the house of a friend she worked with. She was worried about her. She told them that her friend, a prominent doctor at a nearby medical school, had failed to show up at work that morning.
222, we'll be arriving on the scene.
Look, here they are.
According to her colleague, this was completely out of character. She had not responded to phone calls to the house all day, nor had she answered her door.
When we hung up, everything was fine. She said she'd see me tomorrow. And nothing out of the ordinary. And that was yesterday.
The colleague was sure that something was wrong.
It's just not like her to do this. I'm just very concerned about
The
it.
doors and windows of the house were locked. From the outside, everything seemed normal.
It's just not like her to miss an important paper, an important day like this.
The officers found that the garage door was unlocked. And inside, the door to the house, wide open. Jewelry on the floor suggested a robbery.
222, I'm ready to use the bag with you as possible for it.
The house had been ransacked. The officers moved cautiously. An intruder could still be inside. The downstairs was clear. But a trail of clothes led to the second floor. In the master bedroom, they found the doctor. She had been brutally murdered.
222, let me have a supervisor and a crime scene unit to the scene.
Detective Kenneth Maha responded to the scene. Though a 10-year veteran of the department, he was surprised by the report of a homicide.
West University Place, just a small little suburb, 2.2 square miles, right in the middle of Houston, largely residential and an affluent community. And the last time we had a murder was in 1985 during a robbery of a pharmacy.
The brutality of the crime struck the detective.
Blood spatter was all over the place in the hallway and on the walls and the door. The body was completely covered except for one arm sticking out and her two legs. There was a large butcher knife that was near the body, laying on a pillow.
Investigators also recovered a heavy, blood-spattered blunt object nearby. Both were weapons of opportunity the killer found in the house. Police contacted the doctor's husband and learned he had taken the couple's 2 children out of town to visit relatives before Christmas. They'd been gone for several days.
The victim had work obligations to take care of that week, so she was not able to travel with him.
Take a look at this over here.
Evidence suggested that the killer had taken his time in the house. He tore open Christmas gifts and rummaged through the victim's belongings.
Contents of her purse were spilled out, and her driver's license was clearly left out and displayed. It was quite strange to see it like that.
In the kitchen, the detective found partially eaten fruit. Possibly more evidence the killer had lingered in the house. He also found the keys to the victim's Jeep. According to the doctor's husband, it was the only set. In the garage, there were no foreign fingerprints at the suspected point of entry. But on a workbench, investigators found the broken cover of a steering column next to some pry tools. The killer must have stolen the victim's Jeep.
We surmised then that he had to break the steering column of the Jeep to actually crank it up and to start it.
Here, the murderer made a crucial mistake.
When I picked up the large piece of the steering column, I could visibly see fingerprints on the shiny black plastic.
The column cover was bagged for later analysis at the lab. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined cause of death: multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma to the head. The victim had been sexually assaulted. The gruesome nature of the murder worried Detective Maha.
It just didn't fit the pattern of a random killing. It was a step beyond.
Investigators knew that killers like this usually don't strike only once. 2 days later, and 200 miles away, San Antonio police found an abandoned Jeep in a motel parking lot. The plates were traced to West University Place. It belonged to the doctor. The plastic cover of the steering column was missing. Inside, investigators found a guitar and a meat cleaver. The doctor's husband had noted that both items were missing from the house. Someone had hotwired the Jeep in a hurry.
We noticed too that the steering column was just in absolute disarray.
The Jeep was fingerprinted inside and out, but technicians found no usable prints. At the police department's forensics lab, analysts made electronic copies of the fingerprints lifted from the Jeep's steering column cover and ran them through an automated matching system.
And at that time, we got a positive match on an individual named Carlos Rodriguez.
A computer check revealed another name, Rafael Rescendes Ramirez. This was forwarded to the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division. A search of their extensive database revealed dozens of other aliases and more information on Rescendes. He had an extensive record going back more than 20 years and an active warrant on a stolen vehicle charge. Investigators reviewed the suspect's file from the Immigration and Naturalization Service and learned Rescendes traveled regularly and illegally between the United States and Mexico. Most recently, he had been arrested in California for trespassing on railroad property with a loaded firearm and was deported to Mexico. Now it appeared that Rafael Rescendes was back in Texas. His transient lifestyle would make him difficult to find. Detective Maha searched the suspect's records for a place to start and found the name of the fugitive's sister. She lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In a prearranged phone conference, Maha spoke with her at the Albuquerque Police Department.
We'd be able to get some things, some information about your brother, if that'd be all right. She wasn't able to tell me a whole lot about current activity of her brother. She did not have much contact with him. She did mention that he would sometimes drift through Albuquerque, stay with her for a few days, and then just disappear.
Detective Maha asked her to call if she heard from her brother.
And I think there was a little bit of anger and resentment on her part at having to be involved with it. She really didn't want to be associated with him, if indeed he was a real killer as we thought that he was.
Authorities also asked the public for help. They distributed wanted posters along the train routes Rescendes was known to use. Dozens of tips turned up nothing. In March, 3 months after the doctor's murder, there was a series of reported sightings in rail yards near San Antonio. Rescendes had traveled 200 miles west. Each time, he fled before police could respond. The suspected killer was still on the move, hopping trains and eluding authorities. With thousands of miles of train tracks to choose from, Rafael Rescendes could be anywhere. Five months after the doctor's murder, and only 90 miles away in Weimar, Texas, members of a local church went to check on their pastor. He and his wife had not been at church that morning.
The door's wide open. Pastor! Pastor!
The couple was found, murdered in their own bed. Weimar's a small town. Murder is nearly unheard of. Texas Rangers and the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene. The preacher and his wife had been bludgeoned to death with a sledgehammer, a weapon of opportunity taken from their garage. The coroner set time of death at 24 to 36 hours earlier. The couple had been murdered late Friday or early Saturday morning. Money and valuables lay in plain sight. Robbery was clearly not the motive. Deputies processed the bedroom with luminol, a chemical that reacts to the protein in blood and other bodily fluids. It revealed the victim's blood and bodily fluid from an unknown source. Forensic testing later revealed the woman had been sexually assaulted. It appeared that after the murders, The killer had lingered at the crime scene. He ate in the victim's kitchen and took his time studying their driver's licenses. The investigators at the scene were unaware of the West University Place murder, but not for long. In May 1999, Texas authorities were on the trail of a fugitive, Rafael Rescendes. Fingerprints implicated him in the murder of a doctor in West University Place. 4 months later, a preacher and his wife were found beaten to death in their home in Weimar. The couple's red pickup truck was missing, probably stolen by the killer. Police put out an APB for the vehicle. At the Department of Public Safety, investigators from the Texas Rangers were troubled by the crime scene. The evidence in the house, partially eaten food and displayed ID cards, suggested a ritualistic killer. The Rangers contacted the FBI's Houston field office to get the opinion of a criminal profiler, Special Agent Mark Young.
You have in a crime scene a lot of messages, a lot of forensic evidence, and a lot of behavioral evidence. You can pick up not only the forensics, the fingerprints, the DNA, the hairs and fibers, and those types of things, but you can also get a look into the offender's behavior. The way he commits that crime is unique. It's different than any other offender.
Young noted that this killer acted with extreme rage, but no sign of panic.
What really struck me behaviorally was this offender, unlike a lot of others, spent an incredible amount of time in that house going through everything. Their wallet and purse, respectively, were opened up, and their identification was showing. In other words, the offender sat there and looked at their photographs, not taking any credit cards, not taking any cash.
Profilers can analyze a killer's behavioral choices in an attempt to reveal details about him. In this case, after killing the victims, the perpetrator kept striking with his weapon. But then he covered their bodies. This suggested perhaps even he was repelled by the results of his actions. Displaying the victim's ID cards might be an act of domination, as if he wanted details about the lives he had taken. One of the Texas Rangers Young spoke to had seen something like this before.
He realized, because he had some knowledge of the case in West University, that some of the same types of things had happened. And he said, hey guys, could this be connected? Not only are we looking at some MO that seems similar, but we're looking at behavior, this ritualistic behavior, or what we call sometimes signature of an offender.
If there was a connection between the two cases, the forensics lab would find it.
One of the advantages we had is that we had forensic evidence in both places. We had fingerprints and DNA evidence in the West University case. We also had DNA evidence at the Weimar location.
DNA analysis revealed that the bodily fluid recovered in both cases matched. The same man sexually assaulted both women. Since the first victim's Jeep had been recovered, investigators wondered how the killer got to the second crime scene. In both cases, a vehicle had been stolen after the crime.
That would have meant, traditionally, that somebody had to bring the person there, or that they were somebody from close by.
Young studied the case file of suspect Rafael Rescendes.
There was information already in that fugitive investigation indicating that Rescendes got around by train.
According to the file, there were train tracks 50 yards from the doctor's house in West University Place.
We turned around and looked. There's a train track immediately across the street from the Weimar location.
With the two cases directly connected, investigators believed Rafael Rescendes was a ritual serial killer.
The manner that he did these crimes is somewhat evolutionary. You don't just wake up one day and boom, get involved in that type of crime. It's something that you've practiced, you've built up to, and you've done before. And he's not going to stop all of a sudden either.
They feared Rescendes was using stolen vehicles and the railroads to find his next victim. At the Houston field office, the FBI's Fugitive squad joined the hunt for Rescendes. Special Agent Bobby Eckert led the investigation.
We knew that he had fled the jurisdiction and had most likely traveled interstate and, in fact, into Mexico.
Because Rescendes had likely left Texas, they obtained an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant. It would allow the FBI to add its federal resources to the hunt.
The first thing that we wanted to do is to find out everything that we possibly could about Rescendes. We knew that he had been arrested over 13 times. I immediately started getting all the prison record pin packets so that I could identify not only relatives but associates, determine his patterns. All the interviews revealed to us that this was a man who was not well known by anybody. His family had not really had a lot of contact with him since he left home at 12 years of age and moved to Acapulco and eventually to Florida.
With little to go on, criminal profiler Mark Young tried to unlock the drifter's past to predict his next move. He forwarded details of both cases to analysts at the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. VICAP analysts use sophisticated databases to identify similar unsolved cases.
Immediately, they were able to return to me a case in Lexington, Kentucky. A Hispanic male had assaulted a college student and murdered her boyfriend. This happened late at night in 1997 near the railroad tracks where these two had been walking. The male was killed by his skull being crushed by a rock, and the female was sexually assaulted. She was also physically assaulted, pretty severe injuries.
Though dazed by the attack, the young woman somehow survived. Seeing that her boyfriend was dead, she made her way to a nearby house where residents called the police.
She was able to give them an artist depiction, a local artist, of the offender.
Young received the sketch from the Lexington Police Department.
I compared it, and I didn't immediately say, wow, you know, this is him. What I felt was kind of a guarded optimism that this could be the same guy.
But a sketch isn't proof. Young needed scientific evidence to be sure. He learned that the Lexington police still had DNA samples from the sexual assault 2 years earlier, and arranged for the samples to be flown to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. At the DNA analysis unit, examiners began processing the samples.
A couple samples to be worked.
Examiner Alan Giusti.
Homicide out of Kentucky. We look at 13 different unique DNA regions, and we develop an individual profile at each one of those regions. I describe it like looking at a person's physical characteristics. You can look at one DNA region and it might be the same as another person's. And that'd be like saying that two people both have brown eyes. Well, that's very common. You look at 13 different DNA regions, it's like saying somebody has brown eyes, is left-handed, is 6'3", is got red hair. The more DNA regions you look at, the more complete the picture you get of the person.
After mapping the DNA profile of the perpetrator from Lexington, Giusti contacted the examiners in Texas who had mapped the samples from Weimar and West University Place.
by comparing the results that I obtained with the results they obtained, we were both able to determine that we had a possible common donor. In other words, the same person was committing these crimes.
In Texas, Young forwarded the news to the other investigators.
I was able to call Lexington PD, and I heard a lot of hooping and hollering because they thought it was going to be an unsolved case.
Lexington police now had Rafael Rescendes as their prime suspect. Authorities across the Southwest canvassed homeless shelters and train yards. They knew Rescendes was out there, somewhere. On May 28th, authorities found the preacher's truck abandoned near a train yard in San Antonio. It looked like Rescendes had returned to the rails. Finding him would be an overwhelming task for Special Agent Eckert and her team.
We had never faced this type of obstacle before. There are thousands of tracks, there are thousands of trains every day. And it was difficult to determine which line that he rode.
With a massive search area to cover, they had to be resourceful.
One way we handled this is we developed a small wanted poster that we gave to the people that frequently rode the railroads.
In train yards across the nation, locals were advised to be on the lookout for Rafael Rescendes. If they spotted him, they should call the FBI Fugitive Squad immediately.
When we received these calls, we would contact the railroad police. They would pull the person off the train and identify them.
Agents and railroad police responded to hundreds of sightings. Each time, it wasn't Rescendes. The FBI's best lead was the fugitive's sister in New Mexico. Agents stayed in contact with her, hoping she might hear from him.
If for any reason he's contacting you,
And if she did hear from him, they hoped she'd talk.
No, I told you the last time we spoke that...
So far, it seemed the only way to track Rescendes was to follow a trail of bodies. On June 4th, 1999, a Fayette County, Texas woman stopped by her mother's house to check on her. The 73-year-old widow lived alone. The house had been ransacked.
Mom?
There was no sign of her mother.
Mom?
As she searched each room, her panic rose.
Mother!
Then, in the bedroom, she found her mother's body. The elderly woman had been bludgeoned to death. In 1999, agents were on the trail of Rafael Rescendes, linked to 4 murders in Texas and Kentucky. As his notoriety grew, the press dubbed him the Railroad Killer. Now, an elderly widow had been murdered in rural Fayette County, Texas. Like the other victims, she lived near a railroad. The gruesome crime looked like the work of Rafael Rescendes, according to FBI Special Agent Mark Young.
When you looked at that real brutal style of murder, you felt like, yeah, we gotta be dealing with the same guy, because she was covered similarly. There were jewelry boxes that had been opened up in other rooms. Things had been opened and gone through, and there were items taken.
It was a familiar and disturbing pattern. Cash and jewelry had been left behind. Instead, the killer stole trinkets and personal items, as if taking souvenirs. Fingerprints in the laundry room indicated the killer had broken in through a rear window. The print was later matched to Rescendes. After slaying his victim, he was in no rush to leave.
Not only did he go around to all of the rooms, take certain items, and spend an inordinate amount of time, he went and had some fruit and some bread, which was a thing that we had seen a number of times. I take that to be more of a signature showing that I totally own and dominate this individual and their belongings, more than I'm hungry and I need something to eat.
Two distinctive clues at the Fayette County scene seemed intended as a message to investigators. A newspaper had been placed on the sofa, open to an article about the recovery of the preacher's stolen vehicle. In a guest bedroom, they found a toy train. It had been recently unpacked and set up on the bed. It seemed the railroad killer was taunting the authorities. A canine unit followed his scent to the train tracks. From there, the trail went cold. Less than 24 hours later, the next victim was discovered. Another gruesome murder near railroad tracks. This one 95 miles from Fayette County.
I got a call in regard to a crime scene in Houston that was being assessed by the Houston Police Department. They were noticing some similarities.
A 26-year-old school teacher was found sexually assaulted and bludgeoned to death in her bedroom. Her driver's license had been removed from her wallet and displayed on a table. Like the other victims, she lived near railroad tracks. The teacher's car, a white Honda sedan, had been stolen. Later DNA analysis confirmed Rescendes had assaulted the woman. Now he was killing at a much faster pace.
One of the concerns we did have was that this guy was going to evolve into what we call a spree killer. A lot of times in the past, we've had serial killers, Ted Bundy, for instance, that the pressure got so great that they went into a spree mode, and that is they began to kill a number of victims with really no cooling off period.
With his last two victims killed in a 24-hour period, it appeared Rescendes had made the shift to spree killer.
2014, three-step protection on the conductor. Jumping in, air and brake, go out.
On June 6th, a rail yard worker spotted the fugitive in Flatonia, Texas, halfway between Houston and San Antonio.
2014, we have a trespass on premises. Call Central Dispatch, running westbound.
He immediately notified local police and the FBI.
2014, we got an emergency situation. Male Hispanic, westbound.
Once again, Rescendes slipped away.
Okay, guys, we've got some additional information.
At the Houston FBI field office, Operation Train Stop was created. Now investigators from more than 30 agencies were assigned exclusively to the case.
You'll remember we got involved.
Special Agent Bobby Eckerd was part of the operation that was comprised of two basic squads.
You had the one squad that was the serial homicide investigators that were looking into the various homicides, developing evidence of crimes. Then the other side was the fugitive investigators that their sole purpose was to locate, apprehend, and arrest Rescendes.
The fugitive squad looked for patterns in the suspect's past.
We were able to determine that he followed the crops throughout the United States. In Washington State, he followed the avocado route. In Florida, he would be involved in the citrus crops. In Kentucky and North Carolina, he would pick tobacco.
After identifying farm work sites and addresses of friends and family, agents would try to eliminate these comfort zones.
When you go everywhere that you can possibly think of that the fugitive might show up. By going there, by law enforcement presence in those places, people aren't willing to help out the fugitive anymore.
But this fugitive was comfortable traveling fast and on his own without any help. And his murder spree was not yet over. 8 days after the schoolteacher was killed in Houston, her car was found 300 miles away near the Mexican border. Inside was a knife, but no sign of where Rescendes had gone. Nearby were train tracks, giving the killer a clean escape to almost anywhere. In 1999, more than 30 law enforcement agencies hunted for Rafael Rescendes, known as the Railroad Killer. Whenever a new crime appeared to be the work of the killer, Special Agent Mark Young investigated.
I was getting hundreds of calls from departments around the country wanting me to listen to their stories about their crimes and determine whether the cases might be linked.
On June 15th, the bodies of a 51-year-old woman and her father were discovered in their home in rural Gorham, Illinois. The local sheriff's office believed Rescendes was involved and called Mark Young.
Sexual assault apparently took place.
As soon as we walked onto the scene, we could have been in one of our crime scenes in Texas. The double rail tracks were right behind the older man's residence.
The killer broke in through a back window. He used a weapon of opportunity, a shotgun he found in the home. He stole a few trinkets and ate the victim's food. But this time the killer had added something new, a statement scrawled on the wall.
A lot of people thought, oh God, we got some other type of offender here that's making a political statement. Pseudo-intellectual type individual.
But Young knew better. He had reviewed the fugitive's prison file, including his correspondence.
He had been writing political messages and letters that we were able to view in the past. That was even further indication to me that this is the same offender, because this now is the rest of his fantasy coming out.
In his own mind, Rescendes was a deep political thinker. But authorities knew he was a vicious predator.
He was tied up in this chair. She was draped across the coffee table.
They believed he got to Gorham on the train and left in the victim's car, which was recovered the next day 60 miles south near the Kentucky border. Police across the country checked cold cases looking for murders Rescendes might have committed. Special Agent Young investigated one in Hughes Springs, Texas. In October of 1998, a woman had been beaten to death with an antique flat iron. Though unsolved, the murder had been thoroughly investigated and documented.
And I felt like there was a good possibility that Rescendes was responsible for that case too. Didn't you tell me? We had blunt force trauma. She was an elderly victim. She was not sexually assaulted, but she was covered in a similar fashion. And in looking at his crime scene photography, I see where her identification had been placed up as if the offender looked at it. Because it happened at home.
Because the spree killer could be anywhere, the FBI placed Rafael Rescendes on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. His mugshots were posted with 30 different aliases. Special Agent Bobby Eckert hoped it might shake new leads free.
What this does is it raises the awareness of the case, the fugitive status, and it also allowed for us to offer up to $50,000 for the successful apprehension of Rescendes.
News of the Rescendes case swept through the country. On heightened alert, agents and police searched hundreds of freight trains and train yards. It was as if Rescendes had disappeared. Don Clark, then special agent in charge of the Houston field office, held press conferences to help spread the word. But he was candid about the case's difficulty.
It's a very complex investigation. It's one like many of us have never been involved with before. We are dealing with a lot of unknowns here. We're dealing with a lot of pieces of information, and it's a very difficult investigation for all of the agencies.
The story led news broadcasts nationwide. And with 8 victims now dead, the public was terrified.
8 is more than enough, many more than enough. 1 is more than enough. And that's all that I can assure the public, is that law enforcement is working together to try and get this person out of the street.
The fugitive was deceptively smart and incredibly dangerous. He could move across the country easily and slip across the border at will.
What we were trying to let people know was this is not some railroad hobo or bum that doesn't have any sense traveling around. This is a guy with a good IQ that knew how to evade law enforcement, that we needed a lot of assistance in capturing. This is a guy that was attacking innocent people in their sleep, and there was nobody really safe.
The reward for the fugitive's capture climbed to $125,000. Calls came in from all over the country.
I'd like to, thank you.
In late June, Rescendes was spotted at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. But he never stayed in one place for long. Before the police could arrive, he was gone. Sergeant Mark Barnard of the Lexington, Kentucky Police Department warned the public.
If I lived near a railroad track, I'd certainly have it well lit. I'd check and make sure nothing is out of the ordinary. I'd know my environment, my neighbors. I'd check my doors and windows.
The tips kept coming.
We had 3,178 calls that came into the command post. From those calls, we generated over 1,100 leads. In other words, things that needed to be done throughout the United States and in Mexico.
One credible tip was phoned into the Denver field office. The caller reported seeing Rescendes at a house in Commerce City, Colorado. After authorities traced a phone call from the house to the Mexico town where Rescendes had family, a tactical arrest team responded and moved in for the capture. 7 months into the search for Rafael Rescendes, an arrest team raided a house in Commerce City, Colorado. They secured the occupants and searched the house. But Rescendes was nowhere to be found. And authorities later determined the tip was a case of mistaken identity. Texas Rangers and the FBI agents kept in contact with the fugitive's sister in New Mexico. She assured them that she had not heard from her brother, but promised that if he called, she would contact them.
I'd like to take a look at these photographs.
But at the FBI command post in Houston, the next big lead concerned a relative no one knew about before. Agents learned Rescendes had a wife in Mexico. Special Agent Bobby Eckert followed up on the surprising new lead.
The command post became aware that he had a common-law wife because she was interviewed by Mexican media. And a local station got a copy of that interview and aired it locally. At that point, we brought his wife to Houston for a 2-day interview.
Authorities needed to know as much as they could about Rescendes, his patterns, and the places he had stayed.
And did he write you all the time?
She provided us with a lot of information about Rescendes and his habits over the last 2 or 3 years. She advised that he brought her jewelry, he brought her figurines, sometimes little angel figurines. He brought her a guitar. I knew that a lot of these items had been stolen from crime scenes, and it in fact turned out that these items were linked to the homicides.
She said Rescendes had been in Mexico very recently, but she hadn't seen him in days.
How were you made aware of that?
She was cooperating because she feared he wasn't safe there. In Mexico, bounty hunters were after him. Rescendes was running out of places to hide. On July 10th, 1999, investigators received a phone page from Albuquerque. It was the fugitive's sister.
Yes, I'm returning your call.
She needed to talk to authorities,
Okay, we're on our way.
according to Special Agent Mark Young.
There were relatives in Mexico that were being approached by law enforcement, by bounty hunters, by curiosity seekers.
Lopez, thank you for the page. Can you tell
There
me
were
what
people
was
that
going on?
really didn't care how they got him across. You know, dead or alive, I want the reward money.
She said her brother had called her. She did not want him to be harmed.
Law enforcement told her that we could effect a safe surrender for him, and we would agreed to treat him humanely and get him in custody to resolve this thing.
On July 12, 1999, Rafael Rescendes agreed to turn himself in to a Texas Ranger at a small border crossing.
Rescendes, hands on your head.
Respecting his sister's wishes, authorities agreed to let him walk across and to take him in with a minimal arrest team. One of the most vicious serial killers in the nation's history was taken into custody quietly and without incident. In follow-up interviews with Mark Young, Rescendes would confess to a total of 13 murders, 4 of them not yet connected to him by authorities.
He could recall in incredible detail crimes that occurred several years before. After discussions with him, I would contact the jurisdictions that had primary control of the investigations that he was referring to. And we resolved 2 homicides in Florida, Marion County, Florida, 1 in Colton, California, and 1 homicide in Barrow County, Georgia. You tell me the train.
The question in everyone's mind was why. In the interviews, Rescendes made the sickening claim that he killed to wipe out evil. Yet among his victims were a doctor, a preacher and his wife, a teacher, and elderly people.
Did you murder?
All upstanding citizens, well loved by their families.
Yes.
The search for Rafael Rescendes took 8 months and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. In court, he attempted to use an insanity defense to explain his crimes. But in May of 2000, he was found guilty of first-degree murder. 4 days later, Rafael Rescendes was sentenced to death. In Texas, an unsuspecting federal agent is abducted at gunpoint. The men responsible escape unseen into the vast South Texas terrain. Valuable minutes pass before the lawman's disappearance is discovered. With the life of one of their own in jeopardy, his colleagues are determined. They will find the suspects, bring them in, and make them pay.
When the victim of a violent crime is a member of law enforcement, the job of investigating becomes personal. At a United States border crossing, armed fugitives kidnapped a customs inspector, then vanished. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Desperate to find their colleague, local, state, and federal authorities waged a full-scale manhunt in Texas and in Mexico. Racing against the clock, they hoped their resolve would make the difference.
Authorities at the U.S. port of entry at Del Rio, Texas, see hundreds of legal crossings between the United States and Mexico every day. But they also see an average of $250 million in confiscated drugs, all manner of criminal activities, and thousands of illegal immigrants every year. The men and women of U.S. Customs know the threat of danger is always present. Hiding behind the throng of harmless civilians are criminals who view them as the enemy. On the afternoon of January 27th, 1984, a vehicle with Texas plates pulled up to the port's primary checkpoint. Customs Inspector Jose Torres asked the occupants for identification. The three passengers provided green cards showing they were legal resident aliens allowed to work in the U.S. The driver explained he was an American citizen, but produced only a baptismal certificate as proof. Inspector Torres could not accept it. Logging in the car's license plate, he ordered the driver to a secondary checkpoint for further verification. The vehicle was met by Customs Inspector Richard Latham.
Hello, man. Baptismal certificate? Can you step out, please?
A 10-year veteran at the border, it was his job to handle questionable persons or vehicles.
Follow me.
Latham brought the driver inside to speak with an officer of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. The INS officer chastised the driver over his insufficient papers. Since the man claimed he was a U.S. citizen, born and raised in El Paso, the officer interrogated him on details only a resident could know. In minutes, the man's detailed answers persuaded the official that his lack of paperwork was his only indiscretion. The driver was cleared, but Latham still had to inspect the vehicle.
Stand over there. You need to look inside your car.
Following routine procedure, he checked for illegal drugs or undeclared contraband. Since there was nothing suspicious about the men or their behavior, Inspector Latham was alone during the search. To everyone working at the port that day, it seemed like every other day. Then, at about 4:45 in the afternoon, a detective with the Del Rio, Texas police arrived. He informed border officials that a jewelry store had been robbed 15 minutes earlier in the Mexican border town of Ciudad Acuna, 2 miles away. His information was unfortunately sketchy, but he said Mexican police were searching for 4 Hispanic males, at least one of whom could speak English. Police and border officials went immediately to alert each of the inspectors on duty. Since the robbers might try to enter the United States, inspections at the primary checkpoints were doubled.
Good afternoon. How you doing?
Where you heading?
Customs officials wanted to be certain that no one connected to the robbery would enter the country.
Got anything to declare? Okay.
But at around 5 o'clock, Inspector Torres received disturbing news.
Sir, I can't find label.
Customs Inspector Richard Latham was missing.
Yes, sir, I checked already once.
Del Rio detective John Martin was at the port that day.
For him to just suddenly disappear, we knew something was wrong.
Although the time of the disappearance marked a shift change, Latham had not followed the required protocol for leaving his post.
He had not left in his own vehicle. He had not checked out and told anyone else that he was leaving. And the standard procedure for those inspectors, even if they were rotating off for a coffee break or to go to the restroom, would have been to have notified other inspectors at the port. None of this had occurred.
Their only conclusion was Inspector Latham had been kidnapped.
Our first investigative response was to determine when Inspector Latham had last been seen and what he had been doing.
Customs Inspector Torres reported seeing Latham searching an older model vehicle at the secondary checkpoint. He described the car as a gray, late 1970s Pontiac Grand Prix with 3 or 4 Hispanic males standing alongside, who matched the jewelry thieves wanted by Mexican police. The inspector described the driver as a male in his 20s, wearing an El Paso baseball cap. Torres realized that as he turned to check the next vehicle, Inspector Latham must have discovered something. And the kidnappers struck, then escaped the port unseen. U.S. Customs Service Special Agent Dennis Harlan helped lead the search for Latham.
It was a race against time. It's been my experience that if an officer is taken at gunpoint, he is eventually killed.
Everyone knew the window of opportunity to rescue the kidnapped officer was short. They sprang into action. A customs officer retrieved the computer list of all license plates that passed through the Del Rio port into the U.S. between 4:15 and 5 p.m., about the time Latham disappeared. The list was less than 100 vehicles, but it did not contain the owners' names and addresses. For that information, they had to access the Department of Motor Vehicles database. Hindered by 1980s computer technology, it would take valuable time to accomplish. Del Rio police began creating a composite likeness using an identikit. Based on Inspector Torres and other witnesses' recollections, pre-drawn facial features merged piece by piece into an image of the driver. When the composite image was complete, investigators sent it to every local, state, and federal police agency in the area. Police units fanned out in search of a gray Grand Prix. Investigators now had a possible likeness of the driver, but nothing specific on the passengers. Customs Service helicopters supported the ground units in the search. But with few leads, they knew finding the men in the Texas backcountry would be difficult. 1.5 hours had lapsed since Latham disappeared. A car traveling at an inconspicuous 55 miles per hour could be anywhere within 20,000 square miles. The search area was enormous. And with each minute, it got even larger. In record time, the DMV database returned the list of license plate numbers with the owners' names and addresses. There were 8 Pontiac Grand Prix on the list. Police officers went to the 6 addresses in Del Rio to investigate the vehicles. But 2 were registered to owners in El Paso, where the driver of the suspect vehicle said he lived, and that was 10 hours away. A customs agent contacted the nearest FBI field office to seek their help and informed Special Agent Don Weatherman about the kidnapping.
It was very discouraging to realize that we had a missing customs inspector, no trace of where he might be, what happened to him, and so very little information other than the fact that he was last seen doing his job, and no one knew or seen anything of him since that time.
The customs agent asked Weatherman to direct the field agent in El Paso to track down the 2 registered Grand Prix. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley was assigned to interview the owners of the cars. But at both residences, the vehicles were missing, and no one was home. Agent Riley theorized that the registration information he received may have been outdated. He returned to the El Paso FBI office determined to find the cars and their owners.
That evening, I had the clerk in the office conduct further license checks on the 2 vehicle license plates, trying to come up with the actual owners of the vehicles at the current time.
It would take hours to cross-reference the data. Much of it would be done by hand. State and local police manned roadblocks in every direction from the port.
Where you going? You got any ID?
All vehicles leaving the area were stopped and searched. When the San Antonio FBI agents arrived in Del Rio, they were briefed on the latest developments of the search. Despite the efforts of dozens of cooperating law enforcement agencies, they had come up with nothing. Nearly 7 hours had passed since Inspector Richard Latham was abducted. By the end of the first night's investigation, there were still no promising leads.
You always hope that they'll turn them loose, but history doesn't prove that out. So basically, we knew we were looking for a body after probably late that evening, you know.
The full-scale search was still ongoing the next morning. Fixed-wing aircraft, which could travel faster and farther than helicopters, widened the search perimeter to cover the vast Texas brush. Texas state troopers continued their roadblocks in the area surrounding Del Rio.
Oh, how you doing today, man? Where you headed?
Although by that time, they knew the suspects were likely gone. In El Paso, Special Agent Riley eliminated as suspects an elderly couple who owned a gray Pontiac Grand Prix. But the other owner sold his vehicle to a man by the name of Ricardo Cortez. Cortez had failed to register the vehicle in his name. A background check showed Ricardo Cortez had a criminal record for drug possession. Riley located his most current address.
I went to that address, spoke with Cortez's mother, and determined that he had been out of town for 3 or 4 days. She was not sure when he was going to be back. She stated that Cortez still owned the car in question and had the car with him. I went to the El Paso Police Department and obtained a photograph of Cortez and wired a copy to the port of entry in Del Rio, Texas.
Cortez looked similar to the composite of the driver.
U.S. Customs Office, El Paso.
Finally, agents had their first suspect, something specific they could move on in hopes of finding Richard Latham and the men who abducted him. But as their hopes rose, 50 miles away, a man collecting firewood near Eagle Pass, Texas, made a grisly discovery. The body of a man wearing a U.S. Customs uniform.
Men, step over here, please.
In Del Rio, Texas, authorities believe jewelry thieves crossing the border in a gray Pontiac Grand Prix abducted U.S. Customs Inspector Richard Latham. Investigators identified the driver of the car as Ricardo Cortez, who had been missing since Latham's disappearance. But even as they got that first real lead, they learned the body of a man wearing a U.S. Customs uniform was discovered in a ditch off Highway 277 near Eagle Pass, Texas. Local officers secured the scene, but decided nobody would enter until the FBI arrived. While agents at the Del Rio port of entry boarded a helicopter for the 60-mile flight to Eagle Pass, Texas state troopers continued to man roadblocks throughout the area. The kidnappers were now most likely gone, but no one could be certain. Though frustrated, Trooper Art Corral, who worked the road from Del Rio to El Paso, was not going to give up the search.
We were out there for hours, checking cars and on the roadblock, and you know, it seemed like we weren't going to get anywhere. That our supervisor advised to go ahead and stay on that road, but break off the roadblock. So my partner and I decided to stop cars that had 3 or more Latin males in the car. About that time, we saw this car go by, and there were 3 people in the car.
However unlikely, the men inside might be connected to the abduction. The driver got out and approached the troopers.
How you doing, sir? How you been?
Corral explained why he had pulled him over.
4 male Hispanic subjects are involved in kidnapping.
The driver gave his ID. He was a taxi driver from Eagle Pass, hired by the men in his car to take them to Presidio, Texas. He admitted he was glad to be pulled over. His passengers were agitated and made him nervous.
They want me to take them from Ensenada to Eagle Pass.
The trooper decided to run a check on them.
How you doing, guys? Give us your IDs, please.
He got the green cards of the 2 passengers, Rafael Calderon and Jesus Ramirez. Neither of them fit the description of the suspect driver of the Grand Prix, and there were only 2 of them. Determined to be thorough, Trooper Corral and his partner would run a check on the names just in case. Inside the car, Corral's partner tried to radio dispatch.
Any other station out there can hear me? You can copy me? Please answer.
But there was no signal. He tried again. Still nothing.
It's common around that area to lose contact. You had a lot of valleys and peaks, and sometimes you would lose contact with the radio station. You would have to move location in order to make contact with one of our stations.
He took down the passenger's information to call in from a different position.
How much to pay you? Tell you what, sir. Here's your ID card. Follow me back to the vehicle, okay?
They believed they could afford the risk of letting the car go.
Out here, there's only one road. You may not have another road for 100 miles. So when you let a car go, you know, for whatever reason, and something comes up, you probably have a good chance of finding them again.
The troopers took the chance and doubled back to catch a radio signal. By 2:15, FBI agents arrived in Eagle Pass to process the scene where the body was discovered. Everyone working the case had hoped they would find their fellow lawman alive. But the evidence was clear. It was Richard Latham. The inspector had been bound by his own handcuffs and shot twice in the back. The kidnappers were now cop killers. U.S. Customs agent Dennis Harlan was distraught over the loss of his friend.
Yeah, we lost one of ours. One brother officer has been taken and murdered. And those of us that have been in the field, we take that personally. And I was sorry that Richard was dead, but in a criminal investigation of this nature, finding of the body is very, very important. The body becomes evidence. So I felt a sense of relief that we had found the body. Sense of sadness that a friend of mine was gone.
Examiners would determine he had been shot with a .38 caliber handgun, the same as his service weapon, which was missing. For Del Rio detective John Martin, the execution-style murder shed a chilling light on the type of criminal they were after.
Someone that has the temerity to kidnap a law enforcement officer and to subsequently murder that officer, knowing the response that you're going to receive. That is the most dangerous type of individual. That means they don't take anyone's life in any regard whatsoever, and they would kill the average person on the street in a moment.
Back on the highway, the troopers kept trying the radio. After several minutes, they made contact.
Yeah, go ahead. Take it. Go ahead.
Yes, I need 329 checks on 3 subjects.
Dispatch officers ran checks on the men in the taxi.
They came back with a return and said there was a possible hit on one of the passengers, which was Ramirez in the back seat.
There was an outstanding DUI warrant for a Jesus Ramirez. It might not be the same Ramirez, but the troopers needed to verify his identity.
So we decided to go ahead and try to catch up to the car.
We are attempting to locate. We're traveling westbound on 90 at this time, so we can locate that vehicle.
Fortunately, the taxi was still on the highway. The driver pulled over for a second time. Trooper Corral cleared the driver and approached the vehicle to speak to Jesus Ramirez.
I start yelling for the guy in the back seat that I need to talk to him to come on out. At this time, I see the passenger kind of slouched in the back seat, and he's moving around. You know, I can see his head and shoulders kind of squirming in the back seat. So I keep calling him back, and all of a sudden,
Shot fired! Shot fired! I ain't talking to you. Go in the back.
While investigating a federal officer's abduction, Texas state troopers pulled a car over to question a man inside.
Put your hands up!
But the traffic stop quickly turned dangerous for Trooper Art Corral and his partner.
When the shot was fired, my partner reached for the shotgun, and we didn't have time to call anybody. You know, it was just us two. And when there's a shooting, you got to react quickly, you know, because that could mean life or death.
Put your hands in the back. Give me the other one.
With his partner covering him, Corral got Rafael Calderon out of the vehicle and into custody.
Down.
He placed him behind the squad car, away from any weapons.
Get on down. Get on down. Get on down. Go in.
Then they went to check on the man in the back seat. Jesus Ramirez had shot himself in the head with a .357.
Another one over there too. Okay. Come here.
The troopers recovered that weapon and a .38 caliber revolver. Now they needed to know why the traffic stop turned deadly. One trooper retrieved Ramirez's identification and a piece of paper from his jacket, while the other removed Rafael Calderon's belongings.
Guns on you? No. That's all you got?
Including a large knife and a cloth bag.
Get a card.
Corral suspected that Ramirez would not have killed himself over a DUI warrant. He knew there had to be another motive.
DPS unit to base. We have subject Ramirez in custody.
10-4, affirmative, suspect in custody.
The troopers called in the incident and learned that Latham's body had been discovered. Customs agent and the FBI believed the highway shooting was connected to the Latham case and flew to the scene. When they arrived, they reviewed the evidence. Along with the .357 Ramirez used to kill himself was a .38 caliber handgun, a service revolver later determined to be Inspector Richard Latham's, the gun that killed him.
It's in the bag. Found a whole bunch of jewelry.
In the pillowcase taken off Calderon, they discovered tens of thousands of dollars of jewelry that matched the items stolen during the robbery in Mexico. They also found a handwritten bill of sale for a 1975 Pontiac Grand Prix taken from the dead man's jacket.
It's transported.
The seller's name was Ricardo Cortez, the first suspect identified hours earlier. Now, with Rafael Calderon in custody, it was time to get some answers. On the way back to Del Rio, FBI Special Agent Moses Alanez interrogated Calderon.
I was in the back seat, a Ranger's vehicle. On the way, Mr. Calderon began relating to me what had transpired the previous 2 days from the point that they left El Paso, himself and 3 other friends, into Mexico.
Calderon claimed that Jesus Ramirez planned the robbery. He said Ramirez picked the jewelry store in Mexico, believing it was easier to get away with armed robbery there than in the U.S. While Calderon, Ramirez, and a third man he knew only as Carlos robbed the place, their driver, Ricardo Cortez, waited in the getaway car. They took as much as they could grab in a few minutes. Then left. Calderon said they headed for the border, crossing at Del Rio. Everything seemed fine when Cortez passed the INS interview and the customs inspector searched the trunk.
Look in your car.
They began to get nervous when he checked the back seat. He found the bag of stolen jewelry, so Ramirez pulled a gun. As they left the port, Cortez and a man named Carlos took the inspector's service revolver and secured him with his own handcuffs. According to Calderon, Jesus Ramirez was in charge the entire time. He decided the inspector had seen too much. A had to get rid of him. Calderon said he and Ramirez forced Latham into the ditch. He claimed it was Ramirez who shot the inspector twice in the back with his own service revolver. After leaving the customs inspector to die, the men continued to Eagle Pass, where they crossed the border back into Mexico. At a motel there, they went through the jewelry, putting the most valuable pieces into pillowcases. The plan was then to separate. Calderon and Ramirez would take the jewelry back into the United States. Ricardo Cortez and Carlos were supposed to keep the car in Mexico for a few days. They would all meet later in El Paso. The agent noted that during Calderon's version of events, he repeatedly named Ramirez as the trigger man. As the suspect was taken to jail in Del Rio, agents reviewed the facts of their case. Rafael Calderon was in custody. According to him, the shooter was Jesus Ramirez, who had killed himself at the traffic stop. The driver of the Grand Prix Latham searched was Ricardo Cortez of El Paso. The fourth suspect was a man Calderon knew only as Carlos. He and Ricardo Cortez were still at large. Customs Special Agent Dennis Harlan was determined to find them.
Every effort was going to be made to capture and prosecute the people that were involved.
After the abduction and murder of U.S. Customs Inspector Richard Latham, investigators developed 4 suspects. One suspect, Rafael Calderon, was in jail. Another was dead, and 2 more were still at large. 6 hours after Latham's body was recovered, the state police in Piedras Negras, Mexico, asked FBI agents to come to their office. Some of the customs inspector's personal effects had been discovered in a parking lot across the border from Eagle Pass, where his body was found. Included were Latham's wallet, a police-issued canister of mace, and several documents of interest to FBI Special Agent Don Weatherman.
We also located 2 California Highway Patrol traffic citations. One listed to Rafael Calderon, the subject in custody, and the other listed to Carlos Pena.
Less than 24 hours after the abduction, investigators had an ID on the 4th suspect. Carlos Pena was a Mexican native legally residing in the U.S. Investigators received his photo from the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Now they had to find Pena and his associate, Ricardo Cortez. It seemed that wouldn't take long. The next day, El Paso police received a tip that Cortez and Pena were hiding in an apartment in South El Paso. In minutes, an arrest plan was underway. The 2-block area surrounding the apartment building was locked down. Coordinating units on the ground and in the air was FBI Special Agent Charles Riley.
The streets were cordoned off in that area, and roadblocks were set up. U.S. Border Patrol helicopters were in the air looking on the rooftops, and officers were posted throughout the area while the search was conducted.
The search for the fugitives was a sensitive mission. SWAT teams cleared the building apartment by apartment. It was dangerous work. The hallways were narrow and provided no cover if the 2 desperate men were to attack. Despite the thorough search, they came up empty. U.S. Customs Agent Dennis Harlan was undaunted.
You can throw tons of manpower at a case like this, but you need some luck. And good luck is brought about by good, hard, aggressive police work.
Then a new lead came when state police in Piedras Negras, Mexico, discovered a gray 1975 Pontiac Grand Prix abandoned in a nightclub parking lot. FBI agents crossed the border to search the car. But Mexican law prohibited a full-scale processing of the vehicle.
We could not remove the vehicle and bring it back to the United States. We couldn't remove anything except prints from the vehicle.
The FBI agents photographed the car to document the items they could not collect and dusted for any latent prints. It was a surprisingly low-tech process, Scotch tape and index cards. But it paid off. When the fingerprints were sent to the FBI lab in Washington.
We determined that all 4 suspects that were identified had matching prints lifted from the vehicle.
In El Paso, Texas, U.S. Customs agents continued their search for Ricardo Cortez and Carlos Pena. They learned Pena and the now dead suspect Jesus Ramirez had lived in the same apartment complex. They interviewed the apartment manager who identified the photo of Pena.
He does look familiar.
She said she last saw him and Ramirez on the night before the Latham murder.
They were unloading a bunch of stuff out here one night.
The two were moving boxes from a gray Grand Prix into an apartment. A third man arrived, driving a blue car. From the agent's other photos, she identified him as Ricardo Cortez. She said the 3 men drove away that night in the Grand Prix, leaving the blue car in the lot. The manager got a call from Ricardo Cortez the next day, asking her not to tow the car. Either he or his mechanic would pick it up soon. That blue car was their best chance of getting to Cortez. Through the night and into the morning, agents maintained surveillance. Around noon, a man came and drove the car away. It was not Cortez or Pena. The agents followed. The man drove to a quiet part of town. He entered a bar. A few minutes later, he came back out alone and was stopped by the agents.
Ask you a few questions? Sure.
The man admitted the car belonged to Ricardo Cortez. He said Cortez asked him to pick it up and meet him at the bar. But Cortez never showed, so he left the keys with the bartender. He said he didn't know where Cortez was staying. The agents verified his story with the bartender. He'd not seen Cortez either. While surveillance continued on the blue car, FBI agents located Cortez's girlfriend.
What's going on? What's this all about?
We think your daughter's boyfriend
Ma, no
might
lo
be involved.
escuche, no es posible. Ricky nunca hiciera eso. Está mintiendo. ¿Tú sabes algo?
They asked if she knew where Cortez was. She said that she had not seen or heard from him in over a week.
Mira, si sabes algo, se lo dice, ¿ok? No estés mintiendo, ¿ok?
Tú sabes, no me dice nada.
Sí, tú sabes. Tú te lo tienes que decir. No estés mintiendo, ¿ok?
Ma'am, this is very important.
It's been over a week. I don't know.
Mira, ya estoy alta contigo.
Ya,
Dile
ya,
la
ya le dije
verdad,
que
que
no
yo
sé
te
nada.
conozco. Tú siempre estás en la calle con ese muchacho.
But agents, even the woman's own mother, doubted her story.
Yo te conozco a ti.
They asked the mother if they could install a tap and trace on her phone.
Ma, no.
Estás ridículo.
With her consent, investigators could locate the source of all incoming calls.
We needed to apprehend the other two suspects involved in the kidnapping of Richard Latham and his subsequent murder. So that's where the focus went from there. I mean, where in the hell are these guys, you know?
All investigators could do was wait for Ricardo Cortez to call. The FBI, U.S. Customs Service, and other agencies were closing in on two remaining suspects in the murder of a U.S. Customs officer. Agents had contacted the girlfriend of one of the suspects, Ricardo Cortez, and were monitoring her telephone.
Hello? Ricky? Where are you?
2 days later, she received a call.
Be careful.
It was Cortez.
Where was he at?
He didn't tell her where he was, but agents traced the call to a motel in El Paso.
Yes, we could trace down the last call that was on this line.
Special Agent Charles Riley was ready.
Myself, other agents, members of the El Paso Police Department and U.S. Customs proceeded to the motel.
A SWAT team surrounded the building.
Ricardo, come out of the hotel.
Through the combined efforts of 3 law enforcement agencies, investigators accomplished their mission, according to Special Agent Don Weatherman.
The El Paso office of the FBI, Customs, and the police department there did a very good job. Cortez was arrested at that motel.
Eight days after Richard Latham's murder, Texas authorities had Ricardo Cortez in custody. A search of the room revealed no sign of suspect Carlos Pena. The driver of the Grand Prix, Ricardo Cortez, and Rafael Calderon were now in custody. Jesus Ramirez had killed himself at the traffic stop, but Carlos Pena was still at large.
Yeah, no, I wasn't involved.
When questioned about the murder, Cortez gave a different account from that of the first suspect interviewed, Rafael Calderon. Cortez agreed that after they kidnapped Latham, Ramirez and Calderon led the inspector into the ditch. But Cortez said the fatal shots were fired not by Ramirez, but by Rafael Calderon. After the traffic stop by the Texas State Troopers and Ramirez committed suicide, Calderon saw an opportunity to blame his dead associate.
When Cortez stated that it was in fact Calderon who had shot Inspector Latham, this was somewhat of a surprise.
Cortez said that after the four split up, he and Pena abandoned the car and took a bus to Juarez, Mexico.
Cortez advised that Pena was still in Juarez and had not come over to El Paso.
The FBI realized that they could not arrest him on their own.
One of the other agents that I was working with contacted the Mexican authorities and provided them with the background information on Pena, and they started looking for Pena in Juarez.
The U.S. Customs Service offered Mexican police a reward in exchange for information leading to Pena's arrest. Police in Juarez made sure Pena's friends and relatives understood that authorities would not leave any of them alone until the fugitive surrendered. 2 days later, the tactic proved successful.
Pena contacted the El Paso FBI office and advised that he wanted to turn himself in. Arrangements were made with him to meet at the top of the Santa Fe Bridge. The top of the bridge is the border between Mexico and the United States, and there's a marker there. We are not allowed to proceed into Mexico for any interviews or any apprehensions. So by meeting him at the top of the bridge, we asked him to step across into the United States, which he did, and we took him into custody.
The manhunt was over. The investigators took Carlos Pena to the El Paso port of entry. When questioned, his story matched that of Cortez down to the slightest detail. FBI Special Agent Don Weatherman.
In my mind, the arrest of Carlos Pena pretty much summarized and concluded the investigation as to who was responsible for Richard Latham's murder. Their story was so consistent, I'm convinced that Calderon was the shooter and not the deceased, Jesse Ramirez.
In San Antonio, a federal grand jury indicted Calderon, Cortez, and Pena on 6 counts. In exchange for his cooperation, Ricardo Cortez was allowed to plead guilty to conspiracy and assault on a federal officer. Carlos Pena pled guilty to the same charges. They were also convicted of state kidnapping charges and each received 23 years. Rafael Calderon, the man who killed Richard Latham, was charged with assault and murder of a federal officer. He pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. No one had been able to stop the men from taking U.S. Customs Inspector Richard Latham's life. But his peers, his friends, made sure the killers paid the price. Customs Service Special Agent Dennis Harlan.
When anybody is murdered, it's serious business. But when an officer serves the country and protects the people, when he or she is murdered, there's something that happens within law enforcement that's very, very positive. Nobody cares about who gets credit. Everybody is interested in capturing those who were involved and seeing that justice is done.
Memorial services for Richard Latham were held at the Del Rio port of entry on January 31st, 1984, at 2 p.m. At 2:30, U.S. Customs officers in every port of entry in the country observed a moment of silence out of deep respect for their fallen friend.